this is Mike Dilk with the Relax Back UK show on UK Health Radio, your global real feel-good radio station. On the Relax Back UK show, we explore all kinds of health topics, so keep listening and enjoy the ride. Hi, and thank you for joining me, Mike Dilk, on the Relax Back UK show. Now, are we eating properly? Are you eating properly?
On magnesium, for example, about 85 to 90% of us are not getting the RDA. Vitamin D, 70 to 80% are not getting enough vitamin D in their diet. Okay, you get a bit from sunshine.
It seems that many of us just aren't. Dr. Max Gowland tells us just how bad our diets are, according to government-collected data, and offers some potential solutions. Then, a rather stark message from Dr. Sarah Jarvis.
Your next poo could save your life.
The topic is bowel cancer, and more specifically, screening for the disease. Both of these are important topics, relevant to you especially if you're over 50. So please do stay tuned for a great show. Thank you. So my first guest today is Dr. Max Gowland, and the topic is our diet and supplements and if we need them or not. My first question to him was, what sort of doctor are you?
Yeah, 6 years at Nottingham, so that's definitely a PhD doctor, not a GP, I'm afraid. But I think when it comes to nutrition, I think, unfortunately, the GPs have so much to do and they have so little training in nutrition that they're really not experts in nutrition. I mean, hopefully I can add a little bit more value because I have studied nutrition for quite some time now.
Good. So your PhD is not in English, I'm assuming. What's your PhD in?
My PhD is in biochemistry and chemistry and peptide antibiotics, to be precise, many years ago.
I have come across people selling supplements, call themselves doctor, and I think if you dig a little bit deeper, they have a PhD in history or something like that. So I do like to ask people what their expertise is. And what I find actually is those people that do have the qualifications, do have the expertise, have absolutely no problem saying what it is. I better tell you, actually, I'm not a medical person at all. Well, actually, I'm a civil engineer. So my knowledge of supplements is man in the street, general knowledge type knowledge, really. And so with that, I tend to come at it sometimes, and you can put me right on this. I tend to think, well, look, if we just eat properly, we don't need to have supplements. And when I go into London and sit on the tube, I look at the adverts on the tube, and it's not unknown for 3 out of 5 adverts to be for supplements. And I think, come on, let's just try and eat properly, and we don't have to prop up this multi-million-pound industry. Let's just eat our greens, and we'll all be fine. So I guess kind of the first question is, well, you can address my thought on that. Tell me I'm wrong if you like, but also just how good or how bad is the average diet?
You're both right and wrong. That's the interesting thing here. You're right in that if you eat a perfect, theoretical, perfectly balanced diet, etc., you will get probably most of the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients, carbs, fats, proteins that you need. But very, very few of us really do that on a daily basis. That is the problem. And I'm one of them. I mean, I take my health very seriously. But there are some days that I don't eat a sprig of broccoli, for example. And I know that's unhealthy. And some days I might have a couple of bits of chocolate, which are okay, but if you overdo it, you can be in trouble. So unfortunately, the vast majority of us are not eating that perfect theoretical diet. Now, the dietitians who are experts will tell us that, we should get a balanced diet and nobody needs supplements. I'm afraid that's a little bit old-fashioned now. I think people need to understand that they're highly likely not eating that perfect diet. To give you an idea, certainly if you look at the NDNS, National Diet Nutrition Survey, which is done every year in the UK, but it's done across the world, 75% of us are failing to eat even that five a day in terms of fruit and veg. That's not good. You're going to be missing out on lots of really healthy vitamins and minerals. I've taken a lot of time out studying the NDNS across the world, but certainly I focused on the UK, Mike. And I've looked at scientific publications that have been published 20 years ago, and I've also looked at data only 1 or 2 years old. And I can tell you that the vast majority of us are not getting anywhere near the RDA. That's the recommended daily allowance, the target, that's the minimum target we should be aiming for in vitamins and minerals. You know, I have a graph here, which I can just quickly show you. You won't be able to see the data, but it's quite extraordinary how bad it is. In fact, I haven't got the graph here. No, I haven't got it here at all.
That's all right.
I've put it somewhere else.
It's mostly radio anyway, so you can describe it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for example, magnesium. I know that if you take the over 50s, and they're the people who need more supplement help than most people, if you take the over 50s, which is what I tend to focus on because I'm interested in longevity and lifespan and health span. On magnesium, for example, about 85 to 90% of us are not getting the RDA. Vitamin D, 70 to 80% are not getting enough vitamin D in their diet. Okay, you get a bit from sunshine. But again, as you get older, we don't make vitamin D particularly quickly in our skin. Again, many people don't really understand that. Take vitamin C. Everyone thinks they get enough vitamin C drinking, orange juice, etc. Although a lot of orange juice are full of sugar. But, even 33, 34% of us are not getting the RDA of vitamin C. And that is data. That's not me reading Dr. Google or the Daily Rag. That is real data. And I could go on and on about these deficiencies.
Yeah. So this data is government collected bona fide data. Is it?
It's Public Health England data. Yes. Public Health England run these things every year. And it's published. How many
people
I tend to look at
what's the size of the sample?
It's about 2,500 people, so it's pretty big.
Okay,
it's pretty big. I mean, what happens, just so people know, is that dietitians or technicians are sent into people's homes. They get people to weigh their food and to fill in food diaries. All that data after 3 or 4 days goes back to the lab. The technicians then tap on the computers. They work out the data. And they can work out pretty accurately from data tables, which tells them how many vitamins and minerals that are in foods. They can work out exactly how many micronutrients, vitamins and minerals people are actually eating. And they can compare that with the recommended daily target. And then they can work out the percentage of people who are deficient, i.e. not getting those targets. So it is real data, this.
Right. Okay. Well, we've got to start somewhere. And this is the data we've got, and there isn't any other better data. And it sounds like it's pretty robust. So let's take that as fact then, that vast numbers of us aren't eating properly for whatever reason. Now, this is probably a bit of an unfair question, but is that the case the world over, or is this specifically more for the UK? This data probably...
No, it's a great question. It is the world over, probably worse in the West than anywhere. But I've looked at the NDNS data, this Public Health England data, in other countries. Obviously, it's not run by Public Health England. It's run by their own local public health government people. And it is generally pretty poor throughout the world, to be honest. And obviously you will get certain countries where it's a bit worse with certain vitamins, and other countries it's worse with other vitamins or minerals. But generally speaking, the vast majority of people are not getting anywhere near the RDA on many of these micronutrients. And of course, if you're not getting that RDA, don't forget the RDAs were set many years ago, and some of them are a little bit low, and some countries have much higher RDAs, higher targets than the UK. But if you're not getting that RDA on a daily basis, Mike, you are going to put yourself at risk of chronic ailments, maybe later in life, and maybe even chronic disease. So getting that daily dose of micronutrients is really important, preferably in your food. But as I said, we're not doing that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned a couple of times age has been a key factor in this. So I'm interested in this. Like, I'm 56. I don't know how old you are, but I'm in the over 50s bracket, which you've mentioned. Do we tend to? What happens? Do we get lazier in our diet? Do we get less good at processing what we do eat, so we get the vitamins and minerals out of it, or need more of these things? Is it more of a problem the older we get?
Yeah, it is generally. I think one of the main concerns is absorption. The aging gut does not particularly absorb vitamins well. So you might take X in, but you might only absorb half X. So getting the micronutrients to absorb is important. So again, if you're taking a supplement, you should be looking for additional technologies which help the aging gut absorb, things like black pepper extract, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big one.
It's as simple as that. Our bodies aren't quite as good as extracting what we need out of the food.
No, it's not as simple as that. That's just one.
Okay.
Vitamin D, to me, that's one of the master vitamins for immunity, for bone health, for muscle health, and a lot more. Vitamin D, we don't get any in our food virtually. I mean, we have very little. You can't get enough D in your food. So you rely on sunlight. And of course, there's no sunlight around right now, or very little. And as you get a bit older, even if you go into the sunlight, I will have to go into the sunlight perhaps 3 times longer than my kids, because my aging skin does not synthesize or make vitamin D in the skin fast enough.
I was about to make a cheap shot at something like, as we get older, parts of our body are more exposed.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
You have less hair than me, so to some extent it's not all bad. It's
not all bad. Absolutely right. Too much testosterone, Mike. That's the problem. Yeah, I mean, take another, Mike.
I interrupted you there, and you were talking about important stuff.
Another one was B12, vitamin B12, an essential vitamin needed for cognition, red blood cell formation, and a few other things. Needed for energy, of course, as well. B12, we don't absorb B12 particularly well as we get older, because about a third of us have much less stomach acid than we used to have. If you've not got enough stomach acid, you can't actually rip the B12 out of the meat or the fish, because that's where you get B12. You get B12 from the meat and fish. You don't get it anywhere else.
Acid. What? So that the acid is less acidic, or there's just not enough of it?
There's not enough of it. We have hydrochloric acid in our stomach, very low pH, very acidic, very aggressive, and it helps to digest lots of our food. And B12 in particular, which exists in protein in food, fish, meat, etc. You can't actually take that B12 out of the protein particularly effectively. You need hydrochloric acid to do that. And as we get older, we just don't have enough. And then, of course, a lot of us will be on medication. And a lot of medications tend to slow down the production of hydrochloric acid. Things like PPI inhibitors and antacids and a lot more. So there are multiple reasons why we're just not getting enough of those micronutrients.
All right. Are we just sort of living longer than we were designed to? I mean, this is obviously a good thing, because we are living longer, but people used to die in their 40s and 50s not that long ago.
Yeah, about 100 years ago, the average expectation was about 45 years. It's now 79 for men and 82 for women. It started to level off, and in the US, it's actually come down a year, I think. And I can't explain why. But yeah, you could argue we're not designed to live beyond maybe 80, although there's a huge amount of research. And of course, this is something that I tend to read about on a daily basis, about longevity and lifespan. Mm-hmm. There are many, many people, many top scientists around the world who do believe that we can live massively in excess of 100 years, maybe 130, 150. And there'll be other scientists who say that's absolute nonsense. There's certainly a kind of cells are programmed to die at a certain time. And there are certain supplements that can not extend that, but certainly help clean up the mess of dead cells. There's something called quercetin or quercetin, for example, which is a supplement that I personally take, funnily enough. I take it on a daily basis because as we get a bit older, we tend to have cells which die, and that's fine, and then they get replaced, but not particularly effectively, hence aging. But also there are cells that are slowly dying, and unfortunately they stick around far too long. They're trying to die, they can't quite die. They're called zombie cells in the trade, zombie cells,
right,
or senescent cells to be technical. And those senescent cells, if they stick around too long, can produce nasty things called cytokines. That can produce inflammation, and then that can spread to other cells. And that can give rise to chronic inflammation and therefore produce other zombie cells. That is a big factor of aging. And there's a lot of people who believe that if that can be inhibited, it can actually help longevity.
So how does it show itself? That sounds like rheumatism to me, like joint pain, stuff like that?
Well, it's interesting to say that. A lot of joint pain is actually inflammation. Inflammation is a problem which we have in our entire bodies. Inflammation, which is what the scientists call oxidative stress, is caused by a whole range of problems. If we don't sleep well, we're prone to more inflammation. If we're not eating the right diet, we're much more prone to inflammation. So some of these micronutrients and some of the other things like omega-3 fish oil extracts, for example, they've been proven to actually help inflammation, for example. And there are lots of micronutrients, vitamins, that are genuine antioxidants, which help this oxidative stress wane and therefore help inflammation and keep it at bay. So things like selenium, vitamin E, vitamin C, zinc, and one or two others. So getting this anti-inflammatory health is from micronutrients can be done, but don't overdo it, of course. Too much of a good thing can become a bad thing.
Right. Yeah. Let's look at that for a moment, because I have heard this phrase. Yeah. You can take supplements, you can take vitamins, but you're just going to get expensive pee. Now, so presumably, if you take too much, it's just going to go straight through you, cost you a lot of money, and go down the toilet.
I've heard that a lot, and there's some truth in it. There's also some nonsense in it as well. Yes, if you take huge amounts of, let's say, vitamin C, for example, I mean, the RDA for vitamin C is about 80 milligrams. You probably don't need a great deal more than that. But obviously you can get lots of products where you're taking 1,000 milligrams or even 2,000 milligrams. Yeah, a lot of that will be wasted without a doubt. But there will be other vitamins and minerals where you're not getting good absorption, or you're low in terms of intake. Things like vitamin D. Vitamin D is a classic again, where, we're not getting enough. The vast majority of us are clearly deficient or at least insufficient in vitamin D. So, not getting enough vitamin D can be very unhealthy. That can affect a lot of health, parts of the health. So, I'm a great believer in this supplementation. We do need that additional help from supplements, in my view.
Yeah. As more specifically, as we get older, this is probably a very horrible question, but I'll ask it anyway. Can you sort of give details of some of the ailments that, in your experience, we might get? So you mentioned joint pain and rheumatism that you think could be allayed either by having a perfect diet or by taking supplements.
Yes. In fact, I can see the chart that I use sometimes in presenting when I go around to shows presenting on this topic. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that are very different as we enter our 50s, 60s, 70s compared to our 20s. For example, we're much more tired. We're much more prone to things like cataracts. We're much more prone to, unfortunately, cancers. We're much more prone to inflammation and joint pain. We're losing muscle mass at about 1 or 2% per annum and hence strength. We don't absorb micronutrients particularly well. We can't absorb B12. We have cognition problems, perhaps. Dementia sets in with some of us. So, yeah, there are a lot of problems as we get older. Now, supplements are not going to stop those, but supplements will certainly help alleviate some of those chronic ailments. You know, there is a vast amount of scientific literature all over the place in very learned places like PubMed, for example, where there are peer-reviewed, proper scientific papers, basically demonstrating clearly how certain nutrients can actually help certain ailments. There are also lots of papers showing that they don't help as well. And this is one of the problems with supplements, is that there's basically two types of study. One is what's called an epi study or an epidemiological study, which is where people are followed over a few years and they have a diet and people the scientists understand what they're on. And then they look at the ailments and the disease. And if there's disease where people are not taking enough vitamin X, then clearly that vitamin, is a problem, or that lack of vitamin is a problem. That's that's an association study or an epi study, and it's only indicative, but it's not. It doesn't prove causation. Then there's what they call the RCTs, the randomized control tests, where you have a placebo group who don't take X, and you have a test group. And you can actually, do a proper experiment, but it's very, very difficult to control. And some experiments are well designed. Some experiments are really quite poorly designed, but nevertheless, they're still published, and that can cause total confusion. And then you get the ultimate gold standard called the meta-analysis. This is where a lot of the trials can be put together in one mega-analysis or meta-analysis to be scientifically correct. And then you get a much better overview in terms of whether something works or doesn't work.
Okay. All right. So can you pick on, you mentioned a few sort of samples. Can you pick on some specific examples of, you tend to have, loss of muscle mass if you take this vitamin, it's been proven that it will help, that sort of thing. Are examples that are as concrete as that around?
Yes, there are lots of examples, and I can see some of the technical trials in my mind as we speak. Take muscle mass, which is one of the most serious declines in health. There is a direct relationship between muscle mass and mortality, believe it or not. I can show you the scientific paper after the discussion, but holding on to the muscle mass that you've got. Say again?
Is it because that leads to frailty and and falls and all the rest of it? Yeah,
correct. Absolutely, absolutely right. And frailty is something that you really do not want to go down. We all become frailer as we get older, clearly, but you can anti-age to some extent. You can fight against it. Yeah. You take the muscle mass, and I know we might be talking separately on sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss, maybe in another podcast. But if you take the average person loses about 1 or 2% muscle mass every year after the age of about 45. So by the time you're 65, still pretty young, you've lost a quarter of your muscle mass. That's called sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss. And it's something which isn't talked about a lot, but I think everybody gets it. They see their granddad or their older dad, withering away, or they come out of hospital and they've lost 1.5 stones or whatever. That's sarcopenia, and it is very, very unhealthy indeed. And there's a lot you can do. One is exercise. We all know about that. Exercise does definitely help fight against age-related muscle loss, but also taking in a decent amount of protein. And protein's a controversial topic. Protein isn't a micronutrient, it's a macronutrient. And again, this goes back to how old-fashioned some nutrition can be. If you take the World Health Organization, RDA, recommended daily allowance of protein, it's what they call 0.8 grams of protein per day per kilogram of body mass. If you put that into normal daily terms, that's about 60 grams of protein a day that we need. If you look at the latest science, though, and I'm talking, again, peer-reviewed published papers, they're saying that's nonsense and it's massively out of date. What we really need is at least 100 grams per day, especially as we get older. I need more protein than my sons who go to the gym. It sounds counterintuitive, but I do, and I take it because I know about it. I understand it and I read about it. So taking up enough protein on a daily basis can help massively.
And can you get protein with supplements, or do you just have to eat some steak or eat a load of lentils?
Either way, you'd have to have a lot of lentils to get 100 grams, I tell you. But yeah, you could eat some steak, certainly. But there's a lot of anti-meat. There's a lot of people who don't eat meat, or they want to keep their meat intake down to maybe once a week. A supplement can certainly help. You can get some very high quality protein supplements. And if you are looking for a protein supplement, I would look for something which has additional micronutrients in there as well. It's no good having a pure whey protein if you then have to take multiple tablets of, vitamin D and vitamin C. So I would look for a protein shake, but with additional micronutrients if possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is interesting because I am a pretty regular, normal, boring type person. And like a lot of people, I am trying to eat slightly less meat. I mean, I'm not a vegetarian by any means, but, 2 or 3 days might be vegetarian in the week. And the reason for that I'm doing that is I'm thinking it's healthier and it's good for the planet. And it's a bit cheaper at the moment as well. So, there's 3 what I see as good reasons for doing it. I suspect there's a lot of people like me because, as I say, I'm nothing special. I'm just, Joe Public, but I might be doing myself a bit of a disservice.
Yeah, I mean, food first, obviously, is the preference. But getting 100 grams of pure protein, I'm talking about, every single day is difficult. I mean, what does 100 grams of pure protein look like? It's about 4 chicken breasts, to put it into real food terms. I don't think anyone's going to eat 4 chicken breasts. Okay, you get maybe 4 or 5 grams from a slice of bread, and your lentil soup, you might get another 8 or 9 grams if you're lucky. It's difficult to get to 100. And that's why certainly I supplement, and I advise anyone else my age to supplement, because you're getting that goodness, that protein. And you need protein because protein not only builds muscle or helps maintain muscle, but it also needed to make new enzymes and lots of other things, and even hormones. Some hormones need protein, for example. So protein is an absolutely essential macronutrient. You can do without most fats. You can do without most carbs. You cannot live without protein, because protein is the only macro with a nitrogen atom. We have to have nitrogen. Without nitrogen, we're not alive. It's as simple as that. So protein is a really key macro.
Okay. We've spoken about lots of positives in supplements and what have you. And indeed, in some instances, not just positives, necessities, it would appear. Let's just touch a bit on maybe some of the dangers, because you did actually mention it earlier in the discussion, but if you are taking other medication and then you start taking some supplements, can the supplements kind of get in the way of this medication working or block it from working, this kind of thing?
That's a really good point. I regularly present on a shopping channel, QVC, and I'm always asked that question: can you take this with supplements? And with the particular range I talk about, I say yes. And the reason for that is that I know that the range has been meticulously put together. We've chosen the ingredients so that they do not interact with medication at the level that we're using. But there are some supplements where you do have to be careful. Take a common supplement. I'm not a fan of it. St. John's wort. It's used for mental health, for example. And that does interact with some meds, clearly. So I would always say, if you're taking St. John's wort or something like valerian to help with sleep, these are herbal remedies. You have to be very careful with meds. I also think if you're taking mega doses, if you go into one of these shops and, ask for a very, very high strength X, Y, or Z, selenium or vitamin D or whatever. Again, you have to be careful. You can, I wouldn't say overdose. Supplements won't hurt you, but they can have an interaction with some medication if you have huge doses. And again, if you're shopping for supplements, don't shop for silly, huge doses. Shop for a brand which is reputable. Shop for a brand which is typically multi-nutrient, in my view. Then you're covering a lot of the bases that you're probably deficient in. And preferably, if you look at the back of pack, look for some supplements that have been manufactured, maybe in the UK, but certainly to GMP. Now, a lot of supplements are not controlled in terms of their manufacturing. Some of the supplements you can get from abroad, I'm not sure where they come from or how they're made. You have to be a bit careful. Yeah. But certainly supplements in the UK, if they're made to GMP, that's good manufacturing practice, you can guarantee that they will have been made to a pharmaceutical standard.
Okay, because that's important, because I have read it was in an article by Which magazine, and they took supplements and they measured what was in them, and what they found quite often was what was in the supplement was not what was stated on the label by a long way.
Yes, and I've seen that when I worked in sports nutrition. I was looking at some of the sports nutrition products sold in the UK as well. And I think about 12% of them did not have the level of protein that they should have had. But then you look at the brands, and some of the brands I'd never heard of. So they were coming from somewhere else. Certainly if they're manufactured in the UK, I'd be virtually 100% confident that they would be made exactly to label. I mean, a common criticism of supplements that I hear, which is nonsense, is there's no control of supplements. Of course, that's nonsense. We are controlled by food law. We have to operate under food law. And in terms of the labeling, the claims we make on back of a supplement pack, we have to abide by very strict labeling guidelines as set by EFSA, the EFSA, that's European Food Safety Authority. So you cannot claim that a particular vitamin does something unless it's on the approved list of claims for that vitamin as laid down by the European Food Standards people. So vitamins and minerals are very tightly controlled in this country.
They are also, I mean, it is safe to say, it is a massive industry, isn't it? Lots of people are taking them.
It is a pretty big industry, yeah. I mean, the official data, I think it's about 450 million in the UK. And I don't think that includes internet sales, because it's not really possible to really measure that. I would say that it's probably another 50% bigger easily. But with the internet, as I keep saying, you do have to be a bit careful. Check that it's a UK brand, and check that it's made to GMP. I think they're the two key things. And also make sure that there's no mega doses. If you've got something which is, 100 times the RDA, you shouldn't be taking it, because too much of a good thing can become toxic.
Yeah. All right. So very interesting. I must admit, I came into this chat thinking, let's just eat properly and not bother about supplements. But I'm, thinking maybe I should be looking at this a little bit. If people are coming to the same conclusion and want to find out a bit more, what are some good sources? I'm assuming there's probably a good NHS website.
To be honest, the NHS is not a great fan of supplements. They prefer a food first mentality, which is fine. But the NHS has now started to say, well, we should supplement with folic acid, obviously. Certainly if you're pregnant or just thinking about becoming pregnant. Certainly, we should be supplementing with vitamin D. The NHS are now saying that. And I think slowly but surely you will see more and more additional advice as we go forward. But, mostly the health bodies are not very pro-supplement, to be honest. And that's sad, because I do think that supplementation can massively help the health and well-being of a lot of people who are simply not getting enough in their diet. As I said before, 75% of us are not getting even the 5 a day. that means you're going to be missing out on a lot of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, a lot of healthy things, because we all know that plant food is healthy, without a doubt. But, I'm a bit of a heretic when I say that meat and milk are superfoods. I still believe that, though they contain things like bits of saturated fat, which are not great. They do contain a whole host of very high quality nutrients, which perhaps are more difficult to get in plants, things like B12, protein, vitamin D, etc.
Okay, all right. Now I know you have a brand which you're associated with. Is there information on that website?
Yeah, there's two websites you can go to. One is my independent website, which is not brand oriented, but I've written a lot of blogs, and I'll probably be starting some podcasts too, called drmaxhealth.com, drmaxhealth.com. That's DR. So there's some really good stuff on there if you want to find out a bit more. So I've written on things like cholesterol, heart, currently writing a blog on cancer, I've written on liver health, et cetera. And then if you're interested in, a high quality product, if you dial up Prime 50, just Prime 50, and that is a specialist supplement range targeted for each of the health areas: heart, brain, bones, menopause, skin, hair, nails, fatigue, joints, etc. Then just go to Prime 50. Just Google Prime 50 or prime50.co.uk, and you will be taken straight to the internet shop. Again, everything's made in the UK to GMP.
Excellent. All right. So look, this sounds like some good advice. So thank you very much indeed for spending a few minutes to chat about this.
It's a pleasure, Mike, and I'll see you again hopefully sometime.
I started the next section by telling Dr. Sarah Jarvis all about a present I got in the mail.
Now, I'm 56, and a while ago I got a little present in the mail from the NHS. It was a little plastic tube and a scooper. So what was that all about, Dr. Sarah?
So you're absolutely right, Mike. You are 56, and in the past, you would have had to wait until you were 60 to get this. So if you're 60 to 74, living in England and registered with a GP practice, then you'll be sent a kit in the post automatically every 2 years. Now, there are plans to lower the age of people who receive the test to 50, in fact, by 2025. And as part of that, as you so rightly say, 56 is now the magic age. So 56-year-olds are now also sent the test kit, and it's being rolled out to 58-year-olds. Now, this is an incredibly simple test, and there is an incredibly important message behind it. And that message is your next poo could save your life. Bowel cancer is the fourth most common cancer in the UK, and yet almost 1 in 3 people who were sent an NHS bowel cancer screening kit last year in England didn't go on to complete it. I find that so sad.
Yeah, well, so I opened the package with excitement. I don't get presents that often, and I thought, oh, okay, this is not normal, but let's see if I can sort it out. So I performed. So essentially, you kind of have to do your poo on a bit of paper and scoop a bit into the tube, do the top up, and send it back to the NHS, and then. Not long afterwards, I got a little message. I can't remember exactly how. It might have been a text or
I think it would have been a letter. Mine was a letter. I've now outed myself as someone who has also received it, who did not put it off. I put the test kit by the loo, so I remember to do it. I too did my little sample. You only need a tiny, tiny sample on a plastic stick. Then you just pop the stick back into the sample bottle. You don't need to touch anything. It's quite simply, it's a plastic stick. You put a tiny sample on there, pop it into the sample bottle, do it up tightly, securely and cleanly, and then send it off for free. And as you so rightly say, within days you should get a letter saying all's good.
Yeah, so that's what I had. But I must admit, I had this image in my head of this poor soul somewhere in a lab receiving hundreds of these things and then having to open them. And then I thought, well, what do they do with them? What do they actually check?
So it's a really good question. The answer is they're checking for microscopic, really tiny bits of blood, which would not be visible to the naked eye. So the whole point about this is the NHS bowel cancer screening kit detects signs of cancer before you notice anything is wrong. And the reason that is so important is that detecting bowel cancer at the earliest stages makes you up to 9 times, and I repeat that, 9 times more likely to be successfully treated. Now, the vast majority of people are going to have the all clear. 98 out of 100 people are going to get that lovely letter which says, marvelous news, all clear, don't worry. Obviously, if you do develop symptoms in the next 2 years before you get your next kit, it doesn't mean you ignore them, because things can happen even if you've had the all clear, and cancer can develop. But the whole point is 98 out of 100 people will get it. And of those who don't, many of those, they'll be invited for further tests. And if you then go on to have further tests, such as looking at the inside of your bowel with a tiny, tiny flexible telescope, they can pick up cancers, but they can also pick up whether there's a non-cancerous cause like polyps or like piles. Now, polyps are not cancerous. They're little growths in the bowel, and they can be snipped off and looked at under a microscope to make sure they're okay. And of course, if there is cancer in them, that can, that could prevent you in the future from developing cancer if those are removed, because polyps aren't cancer, but they could develop into cancer over time.
So you mentioned there, if in between these tests you do see symptoms, you should do something about it. So by symptoms, what do you mean there?
So the symptoms can be quite vague, but you really mustn't ignore them. So particularly if you are over 50, actually at any age, but particularly if you're over 50, because it tends to develop more commonly in later life. If you get unexplained tummy pain, if you are off your food, if you lose weight without expecting to lose weight, if you have blood in your poo or your poo is black and tarry, so literally like there's tar in there. If you have a change in your bowel habit to looser, particularly to looser, but if you have any significant change for no other reason, you haven't changed your lifestyle, haven't changed your diet, your bowel habit changes, particularly if you've got poo and blood in it. But even if you haven't, do speak to your GP.
Okay. So you said if it's caught early, it's very, very treatable, and that sort of the screening program is generally a success. But is there any sort of data to back that up? If you are unlucky enough to find some blood in your poo and you get it early, what are your chances?
Oh, the answer is that if it's picked up at the early stage, the chances are very good. And really importantly, the treatment is likely to be much less invasive, much less intense, and much less difficult to cope with. So, it's not just a question of improving your survival rates. When we use the strap line for this campaign, which is your next poo could save your life, we also want to say it could mean that any investigations and any treatment you have will be much less invasive.
Right. So what is the treatment actually generally?
Well, it very much depends on the type of bowel cancer. Sometimes you'll need to have surgery. Sometimes you'll need to have chemotherapy. Sometimes radiotherapy. It all depends on what's been found and how far it's spread and so on.
So presumably this big drive to get everyone to send their sample back when they get it in the post is because not everyone sends it back.
Yeah, very worryingly, despite the fact that bowel cancer is the 4th most common cancer in the UK, and despite the fact that we can hugely improve outcomes by picking up cancer early, almost 1 in 3 people who were sent an NHS bowel cancer screening kit in England last year did not send it back. And there is no excuse for this. When people were surveyed, interestingly, 98% of people said it was important, that it was really, really important to get it, to get tested for cancer. 9 in 10 people said they'd be likely to do the test, and only 2% said that they would be unlikely to take the test. But that was a test which could help find signs of cancer at an earlier stage when it's easier to treat. When we specifically went on and talked about the FIT test, which is what this is, this tiny sample of poo which you collect using a plastic stick, 1 in 5 people said they'd be too embarrassed, they'd be too disgusted, or they wouldn't want to look at their poo. Well, I can tell you, ignoring it, burying your head in the sand does not make it go away. And the simple fact of the matter is, if you ignore it, you're going to get to the stage at some point where you can't ignore it anymore. And at that point, unfortunately, the likelihood of successful treatment is significantly lower.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why people don't return these things, I mean, it must be more complicated than just people don't like the idea of scooping up a bit of poo and putting it in a tube. And, we're not all lazy. Is there any, well,
Busy
I'm sure there
lives.
has work been done on, trying to overcome this and persuade more of us to return these things.
Yeah, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I just didn't get round to it. Well, it couldn't be easier. Just put it by the loo. Don't put it off. You only need one sample. In the past, you needed to take more than one sample, and it was a lot more complicated to do it. But actually, these days, the fit test is so simple to do. Literally, the next time you do a poo,
yeah,
you can do the sample, you can send it off, you can pop it in the post, and job done.
I mean, are there any differences, kind of social differences, different socioeconomic groups, or
yes,
different,
unfortunately,
groups of people from different places? Yeah.
Very sadly, the more deprived the area you live in, the less likely you are to do it. And I think that's, very sad, because it's the same for all screening. The whole point about NHS screening, generally, not just NHS bowel cancer screening, but all NHS screening, is it's designed to pick up cancer at an earlier stage when it's much more treatable. Of course, in the case of cervical screening, it's actually picking up changes that could turn into cancer in the future. So it's actually preventing cancer. And yet, with all screening, we see people being less likely to take it up if they come from deprived areas. And sadly, those are the same areas where people have the highest risk of developing bowel cancer in the future anyway. So
Right.
There is a kind of real, inverse law here. The more you need it effectively, the less likely you are to do it. But everybody needs it. If you're 56, as I say, you'll now get it. In the next 2 years, we're going to be rolling it out so that everybody gets it in England from the age of 50.
Right. So apart from trying to persuade everyone to do the tests, what about trying to ensure we don't get it in the first place? So are there any sort of sensible things we can do? I don't know, like, is it like other cancers, drink less alcohol, do more exercise, that sort of thing? Or how can you get us?
Well, you won't be surprised to hear that excess alcohol and smoking and avoiding smoking, obviously not smoking, will make a difference to, so many types of bowel cancer. But where bowel cancer is concerned, it is really important to try to eat a healthy, balanced diet, lots of vegetables, lots of fruit. And, they talk about 5 a day, but actually these days we talk about 30 a week, 30 different kinds of fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and so on during the course of a week. Drinking enough fluids, non-alcoholic fluids, getting regular exercise, and keeping your weight within healthy limits. All of those will reduce your risk of developing bowel cancer.
Okay. All right. 30 different sources of food, vegetarian food. That sounds like an awful lot.
It's not actually. It's amazing. I mean, I eat since the pandemic, I've eaten a largely plant-based diet, pretty much entirely plant-based diet, actually. And you know what? It is amazing. You want to be eating different fruits, different vegetables, with a particular focus on vegetables rather than fruits. But nuts and seeds and pulses also count as well. And it's so easy to, introduce lentils or pulses or beans, kidney beans. Instead of having cottage pie, put some kidney beans into it. When you're making a stew, put some cannellini beans or some butter beans or things, black-eyed beans, black beans. There are chickpeas. There are so many different kinds, and nuts and seeds count as well. So it's really remarkably simple, actually, if you just start to think about that. And every time you're thinking about a meal, particularly whether it's a soup or a stew or something like that, then just chuck a few pulses or lentils or beans into it. Really good for the bowels, really good for your digestion, really good for avoiding constipation and diverticular disease and piles and all those other things. But also actually really good for your pocket. Really, really cheap. Tin beans count as much as any, or dried beans, really not difficult to do. And they are an incredibly cheap source of protein by comparison to most other sources. We do know that processed meat, in particular, large quantities of processed meat, can increase your risk of bowel cancer. So if
processed
you cut
meat,
that
what's that?
down,
Things like ham. bacon.
Yeah, so ham, salamis, sausages, all that sort of thing, bacon, all of those, eating too much of those can increase your risk of bowel cancer. So we do think that, if you can replace some of that with some plant-based food, and it's really easy to do. You don't need to cut it out completely. You could have what is it, veganuary, or you could go for meat-free Monday, but you could also just reduce the amount of meat you're eating every other day by adding in some of those things which will actively help to reduce your risk of bowel cancer.
Actually, I must admit, while you were going through the list of items, I was thinking, yeah, actually, these things do sound a bit cheaper. They really do.
They really, really are. I know you do need quite a big store cupboard. I have to say, we get through an awful lot of tins and things, but actually the dried ones don't take up too much space.
No, all right. Good advice there. Now, look, if people are listening to this and thinking, all right, I'd like to I haven't had this test kit, I want to see if I can get it, or I just want to find out a bit more about bowel cancer, and specifically that last bit you mentioned, ways to potentially avoid it, changes in lifestyle. Where can people go for some good sources of information?
Well, of course, the NHS website's got loads of really good information about all of these things. And if you want to find out about more bowel cancer screening, then you can go onto there. But you can also go onto patient.info, and you can look for bowel cancer on there, and that'll give you all sorts of ideas about what you can do to improve your chances and reduce your chance of getting it. Okay.
All right. Look, Dr. Sarah, this is a very important topic. So thank you very much indeed for chatting.
My absolute pleasure. Don't forget, your next poo could save your life. If you get the kit, don't put it off, put it by the loo.
That was the Relaxed Bowel UK show with me, Mike Dill. Thank you for listening, and please do join us again next time.